So before we get rolling, I always like to kind of update you with where we are. We will, assuming nothing crazy happens, should finish Jude tonight. Jude is not very long. I mean, it's like one chapter, right? So if we don't finish Jude, then hey, it's fine. Maybe it will have been a work of the Spirit. But I have prepared ahead for the Gospel according to John as well. In anticipation that we will probably at least begin John tonight. John will take us a little time. I mean, I'm gonna guess probably 2 weeks, if I'm just being honest. There is a lot in John that I want us to cover because there's things in that book that are not in the so-called synoptic Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so I want to cover some of that. From that point, we will jump into 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. I anticipate that will take probably a class. 2nd and 3rd John particularly are very short. 1st John, even in its full length, is only like 3 chapters. So it's altogether not a very large study there. I think that there's some great things in those epistles that definitely want to cover, but I don't anticipate that taking any longer than about a class. So my thought is that within about a month, probably 4 weeks, is what I'm thinking, we will be beginning Revelation. All right. From that point, all bets are off. Right. Like I don't know how long it will take us. There are lots of weird things in Revelation. I want to make sure we have plenty of time to discuss that. So that's where we're going. We're getting close to the end. It's been a crazy ride, and it's kind of bittersweet to see that we have so little of it. It seems like every time I'd look in the New Testament, I'm like, how much do we have left? Yeah, I'm not even going to count. We have a lot left, right? And now it's like, man, we only have 4 books left. And we're going to be done. And then on to cults. So, yeah. I am planning on having Kool-Aid the first night. I'm going to warn you up front. I can't pass up that opportunity. I cannot. It's going to happen. So you may not like Kool-Aid, but you're going to be supplied with Kool-Aid. Yes, on the first night of cults. And you can tweet and Facebook and Instagram it. The pastor served us Kool-Aid on cult night. It'll be a joy. All right, Jude. We're going to jump right in. We talked last week, kind of began Jude, did a brief introduction to who Jude is. I mentioned that there are, Jude is a shorthand likely for the name Judas, and that there are 5 Judases in the New Testament. Judas Iscariot, the betrayer, Judas the Galilean, an infamous revolutionary, Acts chapter 5. Both of those are probably not likely the author of the book of Jude. Judas the son of James, one of the 12, definitely one of the things that people have suggested. One of the 12 apostles kind of promotes him to a position where it wouldn't be uncommon or unlikely for him to write something. Jude is called Barsabbas, an early Christian prophet. Once again, early prophet. Wouldn't be, out of the ordinary for him to write something like that. But what we said last time, based on the book of Jude, the first verse, is that this is likely Judas, the brother of Jesus. Judas, the brother of Jesus. In Mark 6, Matthew 13:55, we learn that Mary had other sons, one of which was named Judas. And then in Jude 1, it says, Jude, a servant of Jesus Christ and brother of James, whom we assume is also James, the brother of Jesus, the author of the book of James. So likely Jude is in relation to Jesus in the same way that James is, which is just, once again, imagine that household, man. Unbelievable. No, they would have grown up the same home. Likely would not have even known they were half-brothers until some time. And in fact, once they kind of put 2 and 2 together, they would have still not believed it, because we learn in John's gospel that Jesus' brothers did not believe he was the Messiah while he was in the flesh. So Jude and James both come to faith after the resurrection, interestingly enough. There are a variety of dates that this could have been written in. 50 AD is the earliest, and we said that as assuming that 2 Peter is borrowing from Jude. If we covered 2 Peter last time, and 2 Peter and Jude have some very similar things that they say, very similar wording. slightly different, but kind of in the same vein. Mid-60s, assuming Jude borrowed from 2 Peter, and then 80-90 is a possible, just from an age perspective. We don't know when Jude died. We know when he was, give or take, probably born. Probably wouldn't have lived much beyond about 90 AD. My position on this is that it is in the mid-60s. We think that's probably the most accurate, that Jude likely borrowed from 2 Peter, although I did concede that I would not disagree with the 50s date, only because typically in scribal tradition, when you're borrowing from other topics, you typically want to expand those things, not shorten them down. And Jude is the much smaller work between Jude and 2 Peter. And so by scribal tradition, it makes actually more sense that Peter likely would have borrowed from Jude. But there are some other historical reasons why I think Jude probably came after. Really doesn't matter, just giving you the lay of the land on that. The theme of this very short little letter is in Jude 4. He talks about certain people have crept in unnoticed who long ago were designated for condemnation, ungodly people who pervert the grace of our God into sensuality and deny our Master and Lord Jesus Christ. So he is writing this to fight against particular individuals who have crept in, who are interested in creating doctrinal trouble, who are essentially false teachers. We're only going to cover, like I said, 4 passages. I mean, it's a short chapter, but they're jam-packed. And what you're going to find out is that Jude borrows from a lot of the Old Testament and ancient Jewish literature. Let's look at Jude 5 through 7. 5 through 7. Now I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it, that Jesus, who saved a people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, served as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. Wow, so lots there. There are some big things here in this passage that I think we have to deal with, right? The fact that he says that it's Jesus that has rescued this people out of Egypt, to me, is very fascinating. Why would that be fascinating? Who is he talking about, first of all? Yeah, he's talking about Israelites, okay, in Exodus, coming out of Egypt and into the book of Numbers. Their whole story is kind of chronicled in the wilderness. But why is that a fascinating deal?
Refers back to Moses.
Everybody assumes it was God the Father.
Right. Everyone assumes it was the Father. I mean, that's the takeaway that you get from reading the Old Testament, namely because the Son hasn't been revealed. And so Yahweh, the covenant name of God, is the one who comes and is leading the people of Israel out of Egypt, who is giving the covenant and all of the ceremony, all of the practices, everything that happens there. We identify that typically with God the Father. And yet Jude is saying that was Jesus. Jesus was the one leading them out of Egypt. Now this is very fascinating. It's not the only time that this is being suggested in the New Testament, though. Anyone want to take any shots at when something similar to this has taken place? I'll give you a hint. I've given it to you in person. So actually in 1 Corinthians 10:4, if you go to 1 Corinthians 10:4, there is a passage here where Paul says something similar. So he says, starting in verse 1 of chapter 10, "For I don't want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea." So this is talking clearly about the Exodus, right? "And all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ." So Paul, doing the same thing that Jude is doing here, that somehow the presence of Jesus was with the Israelites in the book of Exodus prior to his incarnation. So this is not, I mean, it's not shocking information. We know that Jesus existed before he came in the flesh, right? Jesus is eternal. He is without beginning and without end. So it's not a shock that he would have something to do with what was going on in the book of Exodus. But for the New Testament writers to come right out and just say, look, this was Christ, is just like pretty awesome and pretty shocking in a really great way. Hi, come on in. There's seats anywhere here in the back. No problem at all. Glad to have you. So yeah, this is what he's doing here. He's keying in on particularly Exodus 6 through 14. This is them coming out of Egypt, and those who did not believe were destroyed, talking about the destroying angel, the Passover, if you will. Numbers 14, 11, and 12, God says to Moses, how long will these people not believe me? How long will they disobey me? How long will they harden their heart? And then it says that he will consume them. He will destroy them for their unbelief, for their lack of faith. And then we have another inference to the Old Testament. So that's the first connection that we make. That's in verse 5, this idea of Jesus being in the Exodus. But then verse 6, we come back to something we talked about last week. The angels who did not stay within their own position of authority but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. And I submitted to you that the 2 Peter deals with this kind of topic as well, that there is this idea that in Genesis 6, the angels who took women, sons of men, or daughters of men rather, as their wives and had children with them, the Nephilim were the offspring of these unions that took place, that they were punished for this particular transgression. Angels were not intended to act this way. That the earth is said to have been in the worst condition yet since creation in Genesis 6. And largely in part because God looks down to see if there are any who obey him. There are none. But prior to that, we're given this little precursor that not only were men in full rebellion, even angels were in rebellion. Bad things were happening. And when you read Jewish literature, you find out that the Jewish tradition ascribes a much more colorful story to what happened to these angels than what the text indicates. So Genesis 6, we're not really told anything other than that these unions take place. We have in Peter, 1st and 2nd Peter and Jude, we have that there was some kind of punishment, some kind of prison, some kind of darkness that they were cast into for this transgression. But if we read a little bit further into ancient Jewish literature, we find in this particular book, the book of Enoch, or 1st Enoch, that there is a whole thing that takes place with these angels, and their punishment is described in much greater detail. They are called the children of heaven at one point. They are within their own realm or sphere of existence, and so Jude is likely playing on this. They abandoned their position of authority. They abandoned the boundaries which they existed in and entered into the earthly realm and engaged with humanity in a way they were not supposed to. And there's a lot to this that is described here, but if you read these passages in depth, you get the feeling that perhaps Jude was influenced by this book. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, he was very influenced by it. We're going to find out why in a minute. But particularly with this example in verse 6, it makes a lot of sense that he was influenced by Enoch in the way that he describes the way these angels were being punished. Is there any questions on that? And then, of course, lastly, real fast, the verse 7, let me just finish this, that Sodom and Gomorrah is then brought in once again as a third imagery from the Old Testament to demonstrate punishment by fire. Now, Jude has in mind eternal punishment in hell, right? He's looking forward to how God is going to condemn specifically those who are leading the people of God astray. And so there is this coming judgment, this great day, the day of the Lord that is upon us, and we don't know when. It will come like a thief in the night, right? I mean, we know all the passages, but it is coming, and Jude is pulling in imagery that a Jew would understand in Sodom and Gomorrah to say, remember that? Kind of like that, but worse, right? fire falling from the sky, consuming all those who are in rebellion.
And in Genesis, it's important for him to refer to that because that's when God was grieved, that he put man on earth and his heart was in pain.
Right. Absolutely.
That David didn't want that to happen again.
No, he did not. You had a question?
Yeah, so after Jesus comes back, and we're in the next life, whatever that's like, how do we know there won't be rebellious angels?
Again?
Yeah.
Or
us, or
Right.
Well, that's a very philosophical question that I could spend a lot of time talking about. I think that the idea in Revelation that we're going to come to find out is that what is being destroyed is not just those who sin against God, but sin itself. So the idea that this could happen again seems rather contrary to what final judgment is, what God's final act of, because the whole second coming, this whole thing, we center on God's punishment for the unjust. And I mean, the Bible does. There's plenty of passages that deal with that there is a coming judgment for those who reject the gospel. There's no doubt about that, right? But when you think about undoing the curse in the grander scheme of creation, what God is doing is He is reversing, He is undoing all of the bad, all of the sin, all of the rebellion in such a way that it never existed. He will so totally undo it that sin and death will be something that is a fleeting memory. That it is so radically, it's not like a bad dream that you wake up from and you're like, oh, glad that's over. But it's almost like, oh yeah, that happened, didn't it? Huh, back to having fun, right? I mean, it's just such a fleeting thing. And so when you read those final chapters in Revelation, there is this emphasis that it's not just transgressors, but transgression itself that's being completely done away with, completely destroyed.
And would people be aware enough of God's final judgment, of how He totally annihilates sin, that nobody in their right mind would even go there again?
Right. Well, and there is something to that nature as well. I mean, that part of the awakening, so to speak, that we have in the Holy Spirit is the awareness of how bad sin is, right? So even though we sin in this life, we're aware that it's wrong. We know that it's wrong instinctually. And as Christians, it grieves the Holy Spirit. There's all these mechanisms at play spiritually that happen. And so we want desperately not to do the things that we don't want to do. And so I think that does play into it as well, that after we're given these new heavenly bodies, these new spiritual bodies that have none of the marks of the curse on them, that have none of the nature that is moving towards sin constantly, then our will is then totally free to not do the things that would grieve the heart of God.
Plus, Satan's not around to tempt you anymore.
Right. Yes, that is true.
When Christ comes back and the new heaven and earth, where the millennial reign, at the end of that, He lets them out from His brief period. Before He casts them into hell forever. So,
Allegedly.
Well,
Depending on whether you're pre, post, or all millennial. I'm just kidding. We will talk about those views, yes. But yes, there is a millennial reign. There is a second. How these pieces fit together is.
So how do you reconcile that with the idea that when He creates everything new again, that sin is basically eradicated?
Well, because I don't think that the millennial reign is the same thing as the final destination. I think the millennial reign, which is one of the reasons why, and this really is determined by whether or not you are pre, post, or all. All millennial belief is that we are living in the millennial reign right now. Now that seems a little silly to me, because if this is the millennial reign, then my gosh, this is not very good. But I will say one of the arguments of and this is primarily in very Reformed Presbyterian, kind of mostly Presbyterian views. that the reason they take that view is that we're living in the age of the kingdom of the church. So the church is supposed to be establishing the kingdom on the earth. Whether it's accomplishing that is up for grabs, but I'm not an amillennial, so just like for what it's worth, if you're like having anxiety right now, I'm not. But that's why I say it does matter on what view you take, because some people, those different views greatly determines how you view the rest of those pieces thereafter.
I'm just taking the words of the scripture.
Yeah.
You know, at the end of 1,000 years.
Yep.
Permanently.
Yeah.
He will let them out.
Right.
For a brief time. And then he's cast them into the lake of fire forever.
This is my better half, Jessica Bledsoe. Yes. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that. There is some connection to Daniel, the times time and half a time that goes into, and some people have done some work on like how many years that is. And I'll be honest, like I'm an ultra skeptic. Okay, it's one of the reasons it took me as long as it did to come to faith, because I was like, I don't know about all this. So when I read the end time theological positions, I'm really kind of honestly skeptical of all of them, if I'm being completely honest, because I think all of them have some problems. And in the end, I'm not sure that it totally matters that much, as long as we get to the same point. So, but we're stealing the thunder from 4 or 5 weeks ago. So that's all I'm going to say about eschatology now, and then we'll come back to it.
Are you going to write a book on this?
No, 100% no. 1,000% no.
But he is on call.
Yeah, not a chance. Yeah.
What was he referring to, pre and post? What were you talking about?
Premillennial means we're raptured out before the tribulation.
I will give you a great handout when we cover Revelation, because we will need to know these terms, so they will make more sense in their context. Yeah, good.
I'm just kind of stepping back to when you were talking about Babylon.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily see where it was about obedience, because when the Lord looked down and saw what was happening, when he saw mankind, he said he was grieved because all flesh had been corrupted. And all the flesh had been corrupted, even like before. I always wondered about the flood. Why would God choose to destroy the earth, every man, woman, child, and beast, with a flood? And it didn't make any sense until I understood what was really happening in the earth in those days, as far as when he looked down and saw Noah. And he said that Noah, he didn't say he was a perfect man.
Right.
He said he was perfect in his generations, which meant his genealogy hadn't been tampered with.
Right.
So I think there was a lot more going on than just disobedience. I think there was a corruption of all flesh.
There is, and when you, so we did this study, it's been like several weeks ago now in Genesis, but we talked about this, the lineages that flow after Cain and Abel. So the Cainite line is very bad. The Sethite line is like kind of bad. It's like not totally good, but it preserves hope. And so the Noah line, that there is a genealogy thing happening there. It's hard to when you read Genesis 6, 1 through 4, it is hard to say that the angels are really doing anything sinful. I think that the story there in the context leading up to the flood is important. But really, where we get the idea that they transgressed is the New Testament, without a doubt. I mean, that these passages, and Enoch as well. I mean, Enoch greatly details that. Right, 200. The children of heaven, right, and the watchers, and the Methuselah, and the whole 9 yards. There's lots that's spelled out in that. And just to be clear, we don't hold Enoch as scripture. Except for like verses 9 and 10 of chapter 1, and I'll explain why when we get there. But it's not a divinely inspired book in its totality, but it is important because the writers of the New Testament, specifically Jude, were highly influenced by it, and if we take what he is saying as divinely inspired, then we have to accept at least parts of it. in part because he's going to quote it here in a minute, as we're going to find out. So, any other thoughts before we move on? Jude 9 and 10. It only gets more weird. But when the archangel Michael, contending with the devil, was disputing about the body of Moses, he did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." But these people blaspheme all that they do not understand, and they are destroyed by all that they, like unreasoning animals, understand instinctively. Woe to them, for they walked in the way of Cain and abandoned themselves for the sake of gain to Balaam's error and perished in Korah's rebellion. So once again, a lot of Old Testament imagery, but I want you to kind of focus in on this detail about Michael, the archangel. So we are told that he wrestled or contended with the devil over specifically the body of Moses. Seems like a very weird thing to wrestle over. But if you read Deuteronomy 34, I've given you the verse, Deuteronomy 34:6. This is the passage that details the death of Moses. And this is what we are told. Deuteronomy 34:6, starting in verse 5. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord, and he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows the place of his burial to this day. So, to be clear, he buried him is God. Right? God buried Moses. I mean, so once again, like, how does that work out? We're not really sure. But no one knew where Moses was buried. No one had any idea. He was just gone, buried there. So that's an important detail. Moses dies. Moses is the greatest prophet of the Old Testament. He's the second greatest prophet to ever live next to Jesus, right? He is an incredibly big deal in biblical theology. And what it seems like is happening here is that after Moses dies, there is some dispute over his body, where his body goes. The devil wants to take him with him because Moses transgressed. That's why he didn't enter the promised land. He's dead. He couldn't keep the law perfectly. I mean, the devil knows the rules, right? And Michael is sent to wrestle with the devil and contend with him over the body of Moses. And it says that he spoke nothing to pronounce blasphemous judgment, but just simply said, "The Lord rebuke you." Now, in a nutshell, this seems like just kind of a random statement, like, "The Lord rebuke you." So Michael is not the one rebuking him, the Lord is rebuking him. But there's actually some significance to this. If you go to Zechariah 3, where is it at? Zechariah 3, yeah, that is right. There is a portion here where Zechariah says to once again, the accuser at the court case with Joshua the high priest, he tells him essentially, "The Lord rebuke you." Let's see here, right here, verse 2. And the Lord said, this is 3:2. And the Lord said to Satan, "The Lord rebuke you, O Satan, the Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is not this a brand plucked from the fire?" So he is contending on behalf of Joshua the high priest. If you remember this part of the story in Zechariah, he is before the judgment seat of God. The devil is there accusing him. He's wearing dirty, ragged clothing, and he's guilty. I mean, Satan is accusing him of something that is not false. It is a true accusation. He has not been faithful. He is not righteous. But the judge, God, pardons him, and Michael is there on his behalf arguing, and he is given fine clothing and purified and all the great imagery that comes along with that. But this is a sort of a toss to another Old Testament passage that Jude is pulling in. He's working the Old Testament in an incredibly impressive way. You have to understand that the Old Testament during this time was not bound in a book like you have today. It didn't have chapters and verses, right? These were scrolls, and not just anyone. You couldn't just go to Mardell and buy a scroll, right? Like, they were very hard to come by. And so you had to be a student of Old Testament scripture in a profound way. You had to have been taught in a profound way in order to understand any of it, much less work. I mean, he's pulling from Zechariah 3, right? He's quoting it word for word. He's quoting Enoch. He's quoting all of these. He's pulling Korah and the rebellion and all Sodom and Gomorrah and all of these different Exodus and Numbers. And it's incredible. I don't know any teachers today who could just like off the top of their head pull this out without some kind of reference. Right? Like we know in seminary, when we study this stuff, we have like kind of an overview in our minds of how this unfolds, but I couldn't just quote randomly to you Zechariah 3:2 off the top of my head. Maybe Zechariah 3:2 because it's a well-known passage, but I mean, half the stuff that he's borrowing from definitely couldn't quote this, right? And he's doing it without a problem. So Jude was a studied man. He knew Old Testament theology extraordinarily well, and he's working it together to sort of paint a picture of what God is doing now and how God will act, how God will judge those who are currently, for his time, leading people astray. And I think you could say, you can make the application today as well, who are currently leading people astray today. This is the same, we're in that same era, if you will. Do you have a question? Oh, you're just, okay, good. So let's see here. Michael, let's talk about Michael for a minute. Daniel chapter 10. This is the little we know about the archangel Michael. Daniel 10. So this is one that I have, I've read this before. I think this is one of the most fascinating passages in the prophets. We'll start in verse 10. It says, "Behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly loved, understand the words that I speak to you and stand upright, for now I have been sent to you. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. And then he said to me, Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humble yourself before your God, your words have been heard. And I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia, and came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision is for days yet to come." Okay, fascinating. Now, I've talked about this before. I won't go into it in detail, but there is another passage in the Torah that talks about how the nations have been divided according to the number of the sons of man. That's how most of your translations read, except for the ESV. The ESV borrows from an earlier text. There is a text variant there. We've talked about what that means, where there are some translations or scribal traditions that have slightly different words. In this older version, it says that the nations are numbered according to the number of the sons of God. Very different reading. Lot less angels than there are men at this point in the world. And what we suggested was that according to the number of the sons of God, those angels have been put, each one of them, over a separate nation. Such that when nations rage against one another, when country A goes to war against country B, there is on earth happening a copy in the heavenly realm that is happening as well. That these princes, these angels over the nations, are also at odds with one another. But it says in that passage, but Israel will remain Yahweh's portion. So that you have all these nations, and they each have sort of this heavenly representative, or this heavenly ambassador, if you will, and they are in charge of kind of working out the heavenly economy with the earthly economy, and when war happens, they're at war, and when peace is happening, they're at peace. But all of these nations struggle mightily, if you read through the Old Testament, against this tiny little nation, Israel. And the reason for that is because Israel does not have a prince over them. They have a king, Yahweh. No one goes against Yahweh. It's why today, this tiny little nation that should not be that difficult to deal with is impenetrable, it seems like, because Yahweh is over Israel. Right. Yes. Well, I mean, it's littered through history. So when you consider that, then Michael is in some way able. It doesn't seem like he's one of the representatives, but But he's also not just one of the angels. He's given the title archangel. We don't really know what that means in biblical literature. Now, in extra-biblical literature, there's lots of opinions on what that means. But Michael comes to the aid and hears the cries, helps with the king of Persia so that Daniel's cries can be heard and answered, and the vision is given, and so on and so forth. That's where we are told about Michael in the Old Testament. We get to Revelation chapter 12. And we've talked about this passage quite a bit as well. This is that great passage where after the resurrection, there was a war. Right before the resurrection, there was a war that breaks out. And Satan and his minions are defeated and thrown to the earth. And it says in verse 7 that it was by Michael. Now, war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God, and they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives even unto death," so on and so forth. So Michael at the helm, ready to throw down with Satan. Pretty amazing. That's it. That's all the Bible says about Michael. And then we have this passage in Jude, where he's wrestling with the devil. Now it seems like it kind of gives a little bit of a, it's like sort of like Jude is sort of like the prequel to Revelation, right? Revelation is like where the big battle happens and Michael finally just like, puts him down. But like before that, they had met once before. They had this like sort of wrestling match off in a location that no one knew about. And so it's just kind of a cool context. These were figures who are they're very aware of one another. They know who one another are. Satan is not unaware of who Michael is. Michael is not unaware of who Satan is. And they dance, at least twice. So that was a joke. You can laugh a little bit. Any questions on that? Quite a bit, I know. All right, Jude 14 and 15. Let's get back here. Here we go. Jude 14 and 15. It was also about these that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, saying, "Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones, to execute judgment on all and to convict all the ungodly of all of their deeds of ungodliness that they have committed in such an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things that ungodly sinners have spoken against him. These grumblers, malcontents, following their own sinful desires, they are loud-mouthed boasters, showing favoritism to gain advantage." Now, this is where we know for sure Jude is influenced by Enoch, because he quotes it. If you open up, which you can't, because you probably don't have this, and you don't need it. 1 Enoch 1, verses 9 and 10. This is how it reads. "And behold, he comes with 10,000s of his holy ones, to execute judgment upon all, and to destroy all the ungodly, and to convict all flesh of all the works of their ungodliness which they have ungodly committed, and all of the hard things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him." Ungodly. How ungodly, right. It is a word quote from the book of 1 Enoch. So people ask me from time to time, is Enoch inspired by God? I always say, well, verses 9 and 10 of chapter 1 are, because they're in the Bible. But other than that, no. But it is important. It's important that you understand that these books, these ancient Jewish sources, while they were not held to the same level as Scripture, and there's plenty of evidence for why we know that is true, they were important in the way that they formed their understanding of how some of these things happened. They were seen more as like historical sources. Not that every detail in them was written historically accurately, because they wouldn't have thought of history in the same way that we think of it. We think of history in a very Western way, right? We want to know exactly what happened, right? Which is really kind of a shame because when you study history at an academic level, you figure out pretty quickly that pretty much all of history is an opinion tilted in some way, shape, or form. It's why World War II books continue to come out every single year. You would figure that like we've told all the stories, right? But historians find a way to bring a new shade, a new tint to the story, and they sell because we're interested. We want to know. We want to know what happened. Books like these were foundational for Jews. They were a part of their culture, their heritage, their understanding, and sometimes they even quote them.
Which is one of the reasons why it can be beneficial for us, because even though it's far versus historical data, to give us a picture into their culture, to give us, so we can glean more understanding from what the Lord's trying to tell us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Not a question about it. You want to learn about a people, then you go to their country. You eat their food. You listen to their music. You see how their politics work. You look at what they're watching on television. What are the popular movies? What's the style of music they enjoy? Right? How do they dress? What are their religious practices? You can't learn about a people without experiencing those things to some degree. Now, you can learn a lot about them, but you can't really understand them until you really put yourself in them. Now, for the ancient Jews, we obviously can't in the way that we can a modern context, but we have a lot of their sources. We have a lot of the material that they read from. We have a lot of the things, the rabbinical teachings, the Talmud. There are lots of Jewish literary sources that help tremendously in understanding what the people of God were like, how they thought about things, how they lived. Now, is that necessary? If you like really want to be a student of the Word of God, you need to go and do all this. I mean, if you really want to understand the Old Testament, I think it's super helpful. Is it like, are you a lesser Christian if you don't? No. You just come to my class and I bore you with all the details myself. So it's all good. It's all good. Any thoughts on that?
Did the Jews think it was scripture?
No. No, and there's a lot of reasons why we're pretty sure that's not the case. I mean, for one, we have their canon. Their canon is the Tanakh, and Enoch's not in it. So that's a pretty big indicator that it's not. This is one of the reasons why I think the whole debate between the Catholic Bible, so-called Catholic Bible, and the Protestant Bible is one that is a little foolish in my opinion, because with the exception of like a couple sources, the 66 books are pretty well established early on. And the Old Testament especially, very well established. There's not much debate about that. I mean, going back centuries, all the way back at least the Septuagint, which is 1,000 years from now. But even before that, Dead Sea Scrolls, I mean, the things that we find, now the Dead Sea Scrolls did actually have some Enoch in it, but overwhelmingly, the canon sources we have are clear, especially in the Old Testament. The New Testament is where it gets a little trickier, although I think it's still very clear. I mean, by the mid-2nd century, it's very clear. And the problem with the New Testament canon is not so much additional books; it's missing books. There are certain books in the early canon collections that are not there yet. Hebrews, James. Which is why some of the Reformation people, Martin Luther, had great problems with those because their sources were more limited than they are for us today. We have earlier witnesses now, so we're pretty, Canon arguments to me are just a waste of time, to be honest. I think it's interesting, and I'll always teach on it because I think it's fascinating. It's stuff that you need to understand, but how there is still a debate about it is kind of beyond me because it seems super clear to me. But
Is Enoch in the Catholic Bible?
no, but there are a lot of other pseudepigraphal writings that are, but they're not in the Jewish canon. So it's... Say again?
Kind of more apocryphal books.
There are apocryphal and pseudepigraphal. There's kind of a mix. It doesn't matter. It's not books of the Bible. That's all you need to know. Yeah. It's okay. Yeah. So let's look at 22, 23. We might finish Jude. Look at that. Get into John. 22, 23. And have mercy. Oh, this is a good one. Have mercy on those who doubt Save others by snatching them out of the fire. To others, show mercy with fear, hating even the garment stained by the flesh. What does it mean to snatch others out of the fire? So you save them?
Carry the gospel.
What does that have to do with predestination?
I don't know that I would go that far. I don't know that I would go that far. I mean, you can both sides, whether you are in one camp or the other, there's an argument to be made for this. Here's what Jude is saying. So he's talking about believers. He's not talking about non-believers here. He's talking about Christians. He says, you must remember, beloved, the predictions of the apostles. They talk about the last times there are going to be people who are really bad, who scoff, who lead you away, who lead you astray. And what he's saying is, have mercy on those who doubt. So those who are in the body who have doubts, have mercy on them. Don't beat them up for having mercy. It's one of the craziest things to me, like when people struggle with their faith, and it's like, well, either believe or get out, right? That kind of nonsensical, and it's like, what kind of, first of all, who doesn't struggle a little bit, right? Like, we're just being honest. I heard this great quote this weekend. This guy was talking about how, the typical preaching paradigm is, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. That's what the preaching should do, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And this is a popular saying. I mean, I've heard this in seminary. This is kind of like a classic saying in the art of preaching. Your preaching should bring comfort to the afflicted and it should afflict to the comfortable. And this guy went on to say, and I think this is right on, when you get down to it, when you live long enough and you talk to enough people, what you come to figure out is there are no such thing as comfortable people. There's just not. Everyone is afflicted. Now, whether they admit it, whether they're being honest about it, whether they're living that out transparently, is a whole other story. But even religious people who look like they have it all together and are judgmental and overly righteous, self-righteous, they're some of the most afflicted people I know. And what are we doing if we're not bringing comfort to the afflicted? That is the gospel. Now, that's not to stamp approval on self-righteous behavior. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that if Christians bear that in mind, that the notion of sin, that it affects everyone, that all have fallen short of the glory of God, Romans 3:23, it means not only that all have sinned, but all are in pain. All are hurting at this deep core level, whether they're in touch with it or not. I had this incredible conversation yesterday. I got to share this with you. With a guy on a disc golf course. And he's a guy I've known for about a year now. Really nice guy. And just happened to see him up here. And so I was walking around. I played 9 holes with him here. And just talking about life and kids. He's got a 5-year-old. And we started talking about the church. And the disc golf course has been something really great because it's helped us build relationships with people and just kind of show that the church is not probably what they think it is based on their previous experiences. But sometimes, I'm going to be honest with you, that is lost on me. This is the only church I've ever known. I came to faith in this church. So I know from running into people in seminary and visiting other churches when we're Jessica and I travel, we love to visit churches when we're gone on Sundays just to see how other people are doing things. And so I have an idea of kind of what the other environments are like, but it is a little lost to me. I mean, there are certain things that I just sort of take for granted about the way we do things. And I was talking about, he didn't realize that I was one of the actual preachers here. And I was like, yeah, and I said, you ought to come check it out sometime. I said, you can just you could literally come out and play disc golf and then come in. You wear what you're wearing. I wear what I'm wearing. I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt and shoes. And he goes, you're kidding me. And I said, no. And I'm thinking this isn't that shocking, is it? It's 2020. There's not that many churches that require you to dress up. But I guess I forget. And so we kept talking and, I just shared the gospel with them, and I just said, the thing is all of us are broken. Like, all of us at our core are incapable of doing things that we want to do, that we know are right, and we do things knowingly that are wrong. And I said, and this is why, like, on the disc golf course, I play with guys who use coarse language, and they smoke, and sometimes even, heaven forbid, break out a beer. And it's why I don't get haughty or hostile. Now, if I had like a drinking problem or something, then I need to remove myself. I don't. But I'm not going to judge them for that. As if not drinking beer and not saying the F word make you a righteous person. Now, like, is that good, God-honoring behavior? No. But, like, is that the battle to fight with a person who doesn't know the Lord? No. And I said, the last thing I want to do is come across as if you just don't do these things, then somehow you're a righteous person, because then what that communicates is that if you do these things, you're not able to be loved by God. And that's the whole purpose of the gospel. That you do use bad language and you do things that are displeasing to God, and God loves you so much that He sent His Son to die for you. That's the scandalous grace of the gospel. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I always wondered this.
Yeah.
So when Jesus caught Mary Magdalene in the sin of adultery and healed her,
Yeah.
she stood up. He said to her, "Go and sin no more."
Mm-hmm.
Was He asking her to do something she wasn't capable of doing?
That's a good question.
It's a good question.
So my understanding of that is that He is speaking to her life of adultery. Don't go be with the fifth guy.
That's sin.
Yeah. Because that's the context of their conversation.
I was wondering, it was just such a, He said, "Don't sin anymore. Go
Right.
and sin no more." And I was wondering, is
Yeah.
that possible?
Right. Did He set her up?
Did he set her up to fail?
Yeah. Was this a joke? No. Yeah, I think it has to do with adulterous actions. Stop living this life. Yeah. And she went on and obviously made an impact.
I just wanted to see it say,
Yeah.
"Go and don't do adultery."
Yeah.
But I say all that to say that, look, this is the mind of I think Christ for Christians, that we meet one another in our struggles. This is the whole vision of the safe place, safe process of this church. That somehow church has become a place where you are looked at as weak or less than spiritual if you confess sin in your life. When in fact, like, that's the whole point. That's the whole purpose of the gospel. And it just makes no sense to me. It never really has made sense to me, and I guess as I study it more, it certainly doesn't. How the church has gotten things so backwards, like so messed up. And after this conversation with him, he goes, "You are saying things that are making me think right now." He was just like blown away. And I said, "Come check us out on Sunday, man. Seriously, bring your discs, come to church, go out and play afterwards with your family. Your kids can come over. We have a great, setup over there." And he goes, "I am seriously going to go home and talk to my wife about that." And so, whether he comes or not, we'll see. But he has a lot of doubts. I mean, he opened up a lot about that. He had really bad experiences in churches for a long time, and he did a lot of bad things in his life. And he was essentially told, in not words but actions, that God really doesn't want you around the church because of the kind of person you are. And I'm like, "Well, bro, you're exactly the kind of person we're looking to recruit." So we're like a band of pirates around here, literally, right? With James. We need to have patience for those who struggle, those who have doubt. Save others by snatching them out of the fire. I think really what this is talking about is intervene in your people's lives when they're getting close at. I imagine a child who is getting close to a fire, who is at risk of seriously harming themselves, and we step in and we put our hand and we push them back. Sometimes we even push them back so hard they fall on their butts a little bit. It startles them because we're trying to get them out of the way of the fire. I think that's the imagery that Jude is using here. Watch your brothers and your sisters, and when they get a little too close to the fire, pull them away, snatch them out of the fire. To others, show mercy with fear. Give mercy to those who are afraid. We live in a world that is terrified right now, right? And dare I say, a church that is terrified. I mean, I would be mistaken if I exempted us from what the world has experienced. We have a lot of people in our congregation that are afraid of a lot of things, not just coronavirus, but I mean everything. The changing landscape of America. Just name anything. Fear is rampant. And he says, have mercy on them. Don't tell them to shut up. Don't exacerbate them. Just have mercy on them. Have mercy on them. Thoughts on that?
Well, you're talking about living in fear and everything. We were talking about this on the way up here. That we're my faith is so strong. You're supposed to just live your life, right? And then I think if we live our life as try to in comfort and faith that we're knowing that we're okay. We just got to have faith in there. And that's our example that we leave for other people.
Yeah.
That they don't see us living in fear.
Right. Yeah, and it's hard though, isn't it? I mean, it's hard. It's hard to live. I'll be honest. I'm a guy who through the years I kind of, maybe it's more of just like sort of sense of lackadaisicalness, but there are very few things that have really rocked my world on a day-to-day level. And a lot of it I think is because of my childhood, my upbringing, and just some of the things that I experienced as a kid. I think when I look at life in perspective to some of those hard things, I'm kind of like, yeah, well, it wasn't as bad as that. So as long as that's not going on, I'm fine, right? But this past year, this past January, we went to Disney World. I told this story, and my middle daughter, Victoria, went missing for like 45 minutes. And it's the first time, I think, as an adult that I have really been gripped with fear, like absolute soul-crushing fear. And it wasn't like right away. I kind of started like, yeah, we're going to find her. It's going to be fine. It is what it is. But like 45 minutes is a long time, right? And I have to like really check my spirit a lot since then with a lot of things because that experience like imprinted something on me. And and especially with my kids, when we're going places, when we're doing things, like there's a whole nother level of awareness that I have now of things around me that I maybe wasn't as aware of before. And I think God used that experience for my good. I don't think I'm being like controlled by fear or anything like that. I think it's making me more sober-minded, aware of the world when I'm with them. But yeah, fear is, I mean, when you said PTSD, and I mean, you consider the experiences of the people in this church that have had in their past, some with abuse, and it's easy to understand how a people can be so manipulated by fear in the world. And it's something that we really have to guard ourselves against, because there's certainly a lot to be afraid of, but there's also a conviction that we have to remind ourselves of that, like, look, things could get a lot worse. They probably will get a lot worse. And like we've talked about that, we've said that, we've been saying it for years and years and years, and like as it gets more bad, it's like we forget that we've been saying this the whole time. And we either have to trust that God is going to prevail in the end, or we don't. And here's the reality, sometimes we don't. And what Jude is saying is, have mercy on those people who don't. Don't beat them up for their lack of faith or whatever it is, but minister to them in mercy.
You know how you were saying you reference your childhood and everything, I do that. It's like, oh, well, I made it through this, and I had a hard time making it through because I didn't have, the Lord with me then, and now it's like, okay, I can handle things a little bit better.
Yeah.
Or at least I know who to talk to.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
good. That's good. Do you have a question?
How do you snatch people from the fire when you have no idea what you're doing?
When you have no idea what you're doing or they're doing.
Well, like if you're an everyday person struggling, how do you see fit to snatch somebody else from the fire?
Well, it's a great question. I think the idea here is there's an assumption that these people are engaged in Christian community. So community is the basis upon which a lot of these things that Jude is talking about is happening. So once again, we have to sort of separate ourselves from a Western view of what church means, right? Church in the West is something that you do on Sundays between 9 and 10:30, and sometimes on Wednesday nights if you're not afraid of the coronavirus. But in the early church was an identity. You know, it wasn't a place you go, it was who you are a part of. And so the communal aspect of this is that there's an assumption that when my brothers or sisters are struggling, I'm going to be aware of it because I'm up in their lives quite a bit. If I'm not in their lives, I'm not going to know about it. You know, if I am walking with people on a day-to-day basis, then you pick up on trends. You figure out like, hey, something's not right about him today. He's acting kind of weird, or something's off, or he hadn't been here in a while. And this is one of the reasons why, you know, as silly as it is, and as like, you know, a beating as it is, taking attendance in classes is so important. Because we start to figure out that like, so-and-so hadn't been here in 3 weeks. I wonder what's going on with them. That's like a very minor form of shepherding. I dare call it shepherding because it seems like, you know, but it is. I mean, it's an important aspect of it. There are still people on my list from day one that I send text messages to every week that have not been here in 30, what is it? We're at session 35. They haven't been here in 34 weeks. Came literally week 1. And I still text them every week. Hope to see you tonight, 6:45. This is what we're talking about. And I don't get responses. And occasionally I'm like, do I send this to them again? And I'm like, no, they haven't asked me to stop, so I'm going to keep blowing them up. Just so they know I'm thinking of them.
It's another reason we urge people to get
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, for that very reason.
Yeah.
If you don't know something,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, if they're not around, you don't know things.
Right.
Right.
We're a very, it's funny, we're a very connected world, and yet we are the most disconnected we've probably ever been. You know, the age of social media has destroyed in many ways our very attention span that recognizes trouble in our brothers and sisters' lives. So we have like...
When you're talking about pulling from the fire, what about the gentleman that you had disc golf with?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, you seeing, as you're talking to him and you're sharing how your environment is and what your world is, wouldn't that be a way of like pulling him from his fire and bringing him?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can make that sort of as an application, but I think what Jude has in mind here is believers. These are people who are brothers and sisters that you are doing life with, and they are doubting, or they have fear, or they are engaged in some process that is detrimental to their faith and perhaps their life. And he's saying, and the context of Jude is once again false teachers. So I think the point here is that there are some in the fellowship who were being perhaps led into false belief because of these false teachers, that they were doubting a little bit. I mean, that's really the context of what he's getting at here, not just in general practices that could be detrimental, but specifically those who were hearing these false teachers and going, maybe I'll go into that. And he's saying, like, snatch them out of the fire, cut that off, correct them from that. You know, and that's why we're unabashedly, we will call false teachers what they are. Because I would rather, you know, like, now I'm not going to be like crass about it, but if you're reading books that I think are detrimental to your faith, I am doing you a disservice by not saying something. That's my job. That's my calling. How can I say I shepherd you if I'm not even willing to say, hey, the book you're reading is false teaching? It's inspired by demons. And it comes with a cost. I mean, people don't love to hear that. But it's worth it. It's worth it. Any other thoughts on that?
It's a practical application, though.
Yeah.
You know, it's basically for us, our experience, when it hits the fan, does anybody show up?
Right.
And those people that are showing up, even though you may not have the inspirational, biblical, whatever words that save the day, but in my experience, it isn't anything you say, it's that you showed up.
Yeah.
So I think that's our practical, for my practical application, pulling people out of the fire, and when it's the fan, show up.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason why the one another's of Scripture are action-oriented, not so much teaching-oriented. You know, once again, and I could go on about this, but there are a lot of these like sort of false beliefs that we take in the Western church that like you have to have a certain level of biblical knowledge before you can be of use to anyone else. That's a lie. That's just not true. Now you need to understand the gospel at a base level. But like you said, when something happens, when someone is in the hospital, when something goes down, and you show up, what that person is looking for is not for you to come and go, brother, let me quote you Romans 12:1 right now. Let me give you Romans 8 real quick, brother. That's not like, don't do that, right? That's not for that time. Maybe eventually, but like when it is happening in the moment, the fact that you're there, that you have your arm around them, that you are like, hey, you're not alone. You're not going to go through this alone. God is with you. His people are with you. That's where it really counts. That's where it really matters. That's the point.
That's what opportunities after that happen too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's where you're distinguishing judging somebody and their actions instead of just loving them.
Yeah, and once again, love has, so I mean, there's a lot of ways this plays out, but love has boundaries, right? There are boundaries for yourself to protect, but yeah, I mean, overwhelmingly, the thought in Christendom is not that when someone sins, you cut them off. It's that you go to them one-on-one, like the Bible says, and try and bring them back into the fold through repentance. 9 times, we always go to and then you bring them to the elders, and then you cast them off like tax collectors and Gentiles. Like that's where we want to live, right? And 9 times out of 10, it never gets there. Because if you just go to the brother and say, hey, let me talk to you about this. Let's walk through this. Let's talk through this. That's all it really takes. I mean, I've told you this before, but when we get into it hitting the fan in a sinful sense that they're walking into, and we get into like church discipline talks, which we've done a lot in this class over the weeks. I mean, there's been I can count on one hand the number of times that we've gotten to step Z. It just doesn't happen much. And even there, I've said it before, let them be to you as a tax collector and a Gentile. In other words, the kind of people Jesus went after. So it doesn't mean cut them off and stop talking to them. It means you begin sharing the gospel with them again. You begin bearing witness to them, the gospel truth, because perhaps they're not even believers.
Evangelizing. Or just reconciliation.
That kind of happened when we moved here. The only family member that I had here was a brother who was living as homosexual, and he was involved in a lot of stuff and wanted nothing to do with me at all in my life because I had become a Christian. And my life was an offense to his life. When we moved here, the Lord, I could hear him speak in a still voice in my spirit. He told me, he said, I don't want you to preach to him. I don't want you to witness to him. The one thing the Lord told me, he showed me in his word, he says, the one thing that you are called to do is to love him, because all that other stuff can fail, but love will never ever fail. And the love took me 10 or 11 years. And then he got a diagnosis that he wasn't going to live. And I was there with him. And in the hospital when that happened, we went out to the car and he was slamming on the steering wheel, screaming. This was a guy who said, don't ever say the name of Jesus to me. Don't you ever come to me with that stuff. And here he is hitting his hand against the steering wheel, yelling to the top of his lungs. And he's like, that's just fine. If he wants to kill me, if he wants to take my life, I need some peace. So I'll just R.I.P., right, Michelle? I'll just rest in peace. If he just wants to kill me, he just went crazy. And then all of a sudden, in that moment, I heard the voice of the Lord speak to me. And I looked at him and I said, Bob, you have to remember one thing. He is the giver of life, not the taker of life. And he's the only hope you have. But I held my preaching until the Holy Spirit said speak. All those other years was just love.
Yeah.
So sometimes it has to be persistent.
Yeah.
And it can take years of just being a reflection of his love.
Yeah.
To draw people towards him.
That's great.
I think it's so tempting to think that somehow I am responsible for people's hearts changing by just quoting scripture to every, and it's a hard thing to learn, right? It's a hard reality to learn. It's so uncomfortable. It feels like you're not doing something in the moment. Like, shouldn't I be saying something to him? Shouldn't I be sharing but it's like there is a time for that. There's absolutely a time for that. And I think that attentiveness to the Holy Spirit is something that we don't talk enough about. And it's a horse I'm going to keep beating until this class is over with, but it's, I think, a product of the Second Great Awakening, that preaching is somehow like the end-all answer to all problems, and if we just preach enough people will get saved. And preaching is a tool that God uses, absolutely. But love is a greater tool, and secondly, when you think about the gift of preaching in its biblical context, it's not evangelistic, it is for the edification and building up of the body. I don't preach to teach unbelievers about Jesus. I don't. It's not my mandate. That's for evangelism. That I'm building you up so that you can share the gospel.
Right.
That's right.
That's not the point of preaching. The point of preaching is to bind up the wounds and to give encouragement, to edify, to sometimes rebuke or exhort, to let the Holy Spirit speak through the text in such a way where, like James said, you're reading my mail, and we're not reading your mail, but it's what it feels like, and that's where he does his work, and he is shaping you so that when you're in those moments, you're used to hearing his voice, and when he says, hey, shut up and just love him, you hear it, and you do it.
Well, that's, I'm not gonna cry. That, growing up in a horrible childhood, that I went to church as a kid and stuff, so I got saved younger and everything, but I always had that doubt, but, like, we started coming here, and everything was like from the Bible, and no one was like harping anything on you, they're just there, and take this class, or go talk to Derek, or go do this, whatever. It was just being there, where, which led me to feel comfortable, right, and finally open up. That's what I think church is about, is the unity that we have with each other. And then I always say, I like going to church and everything, 'cause I like to learn. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be like harped on all the time. I love learning.
Yeah, it's good.
Would accountability partners be applicable in this situation? As the
1,000%.
that have chosen to do that?
Yes.
Accountability partners are great practice, just for what it's worth. Having someone of the same sex is a great practice to challenge one another, to confess to one another, to be real with one another, and here's the thing, confession without repentance is kind of meaningless, right? So, like, don't hear me say that, we're all going to get it wrong. So, Paul says, should we go on sinning that grace may abound? No, that's not the point. You don't just go off and do whatever you want because grace is going to cover it. That's an abuse of grace. But the point is the recognition of, I am not going to do it perfectly, frees me to just love the Lord and walk in obedience out of love and admiration for Him, not out of this sort of condemning, sort of oppressive mandate that the law drives home in us. I don't know how else to say that, and hopefully that has been clear over the last several weeks of doing this class, that the grace is the transformative mechanism of God that makes us look at our sin and regret it. Exactly. Like, how could I do this to a God who has done so much for me? Not, I better not do that anymore, otherwise I'm going to get struck down, or I better not do this anymore because otherwise people might think X, Y, and Z about me. That just creates more problems in our lives. Any other thoughts on that? Yeah.
In our previous church, the pastor had said, we compared it to you're a caterpillar crawling around and you become a butterfly.
Yeah.
And sure, you can still crawl around, but now you can fly. So
Yeah.
why would you want to crawl
Right.
around?
Yeah, that's a great illustration. Absolutely. There's something funny about us, man. I mean, there's something so. James has told the story about the fishing off the balcony in the hotel in Florida. When he took Zach on a golfing trip, there was all these signs that they had put up that said like no fishing off the balcony because it was literally right off the ocean. And he said that there were like more people fishing off the balcony after they put the signs up than there were before. Because they came in and were like, yeah, I never thought about fishing off this thing. This could be pretty sweet. And then they started doing it, right? Law incites rebellion. The greater the law, the greater the transgression. I mean, it's so true. And I mean, when you think about, I think dieting is always great because I'm a foodie. I love food. And I don't realize how much I love food till I try to do a diet. And then I'm like, it's like 10 o'clock at night. I'm like, I wish I had ice cream. And I never think that when I'm not dieting. When I'm not dieting, it's never tempting. But somehow knowing that I can't have it makes me want it all the more. And this is what the law does, and it makes us aware of our brokenness. Good stuff, y'all. We're going to come back next week. We will. I don't want to jump into John. We'll go a little early tonight. But next week we are going to come in and begin John, and just get ready because John is so good. There's so much to talk about in John's gospel. See you then.